Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have so many of you on the call. We're hoping to see a few more attend as we go through, but I'm just going to make a start. Today, we're talking about how to turn the government-issued guidance on screens for 0 to 5s into practice for parents. I've got a brilliant panelist with me here today that I'll introduce in due course, but I just want to tell you a little bit more about the session before I do that. To guide the conversation, I'll be talking through how we at Claremont have taken the guidance and applied a behavioural science lens in an attempt to make it easier for parents to implement, and for you, our audience today, from charities, health services, local authorities, childcare and others, to help parents to do this. We won't spend long dwelling on the guidance itself, as you can find that online, and we can send you a link to it as well. But just as a quick reminder, here are some of the highlights. Just before I do that, if you do want to introduce yourselves in the chat, let us know where you work, what organisation you're from, and perhaps a little bit about what you want to get out of today as well. So in terms of the guidance itself, I'm going to use a few props because I promised myself that I wouldn't use slides today. So for under 2s, so babies 0 and 1, the guidance says to avoid screen time other than for shared activities with family, things that encourage bonding, interaction and conversation. So TV or other types of screen time is okay if you're doing it together for that very young age. If you are 2 to 5, the idea is that you should be keeping screen time to 1 hour a day or less if possible. And of course, that point about doing interactive activities during TV time and having conversations for 2 to 5s is also really, really important. The other thing that the guidance speaks quite a lot about is watching slow-paced content. I was trying to find in my home something that represented slow, and there's this little snail on the back of the whale here. So slow-paced, predictable content is better for young brains. The fast-paced, overstimulating social media style videos are not good for children under 5. And will be interesting to find out whether this character, snail and whale, actually, although it's an animation, whether that counts as slow-paced content. We can get into that later. Leading by example, very easy prop here. Here's my phone. Children's brains are like sponges. They'll copy your screen habits. And so the advice and guidance from the government is really to be mindful about how often you use your phone around your child. And also really important to be present with your child, to do as many shared activities as possible. So children need attention, they need interaction and shared moments. So I grabbed this book that we have at home, which is useful because it's about that connection, but also being a book itself, it's a reminder that there are other activities that parents can do with their children. Now, of course, throughout this conversation, we will be recognising the real world context of family life, which is often busy and stressful, with lots of conflicting priorities, and actually, frankly, enough to worry about already, as well as the kind of quality and content of the screen time that their children under 5 are using. But at the same time, we want to respect the guidance. We know that it comes out of a huge amount of academic research, which has produced an indisputable evidence base about what is and isn't good for children's development when it comes to screens. So we're absolutely not here today to unpick that evidence and that research. We really want to uphold and support it. And everything that we're talking about today in terms of the government guidance is looking at how we build on that and improve what's out there for parents to make it easier and more accessible for them, and to really try to reduce that mental load. So I'll tell you briefly about who is going to be speaking today. So I'm Emily. I've been at Claremont for 5 years, and previously I was working at Save the Children. I worked there for about 10 years on our UK innovation programmes there, particularly looking at early language development. So this is a real passion for me, looking at how we can support parents to talk more with their children, to support their early language and vocabulary, and build their emotional and social emotional skills. And since I've been working at Claremont, I've done projects in this space as well for organisations such as Book Trust, Welsh Government, Social Mobility Commission, and the Early Education and Childcare Coalition. And one of my children is 5, so I suspect I'll probably talk a little bit as well about what's going on our TVs. Joining me today, hopefully you can see, they'll be waving as I talk through who's here. Jane Baxter, award-winning children's TV producer with over 30 years experience creating engaging, developmentally appropriate content for young audiences. Joss Cambridge-Simmons, award-winning childcare specialist, bringing a trauma-informed, child-centred perspective from nearly 2 decades of supporting children and families. Rhiannon Evans, Head of Communications and Public Affairs at Mumsnet, leading its campaigning work to ensure parents' voices and lived experiences are heard. And last but not least, Olivia Dickinson, children's media specialist and digital consultant with over 25 years' experience designing inclusive content and games and championing equity and representation in childhood. So those are the experts that are going to join me. We're going to really delve into the guidance and help to give a little bit more colour and a little bit more clarity, as I say, through a behavioural science lens. So perhaps, Rhiannon, you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about what kind of a stir this guidance has created on Mumsnet. Are parents talking about it? Are they worried? What are the conversations that you've seen online about this new government guidance?
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I mean, as you would expect, this like the whole issue of screen time and technology and what's safe and suitable for kids is a huge topic of conversation on Mumsnet. And I think especially when you consider that parents often come to us in the first instance because they have a concern or a question about something and they're seeking that sort of peer-to-peer advice. And I guess the first thing I'd say about the guidance is I think parents have broadly welcomed the idea of it and the fact that it exists. So without getting into the actual details of the guidance and how helpful or practical it is, I think the fact that the guidance has been published at all has been a really helpful acknowledgement for parents that this is not just an issue with your parenting. You're not a bad mum because you're struggling with this. This is actually a huge problem and it's a public health issue. And so the fact that the government has sort of stepped in and said, yes, we're going to provide guidance on this is really kind of useful recognition of it. I think the kind of second strand of the conversations, and one we're obviously going to get into today, is around the kind of practicalities of the guidance and how well it works in real family life. And also particularly how if you're in a position where your current family life doesn't necessarily adhere to the guidance, as it were, how do you change that and how do you kind of row back from some of those habits? And then I think the final like plank of the conversation that really comes across is also about, the context of life outside the home and the bits that you don't necessarily have control over. So again, I think we're going to chat about it a bit, but like the use of screens in early years settings and other places where your child is and how your use of screens in the home kind of fits in with the rest of that and how much control you have over it. So it's definitely created a stir. There's a lot of conversations. And I think those three themes are things that really come across in those chats.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. That's really helpful for setting the scene in understanding what it is that parents have been saying about this guidance so far. So I did promise that I wouldn't use slides. So I've got these little props here. I'm going to pop that up there. Hopefully you can see that. So we're going to talk firstly about specificity. To some extent, we felt when we were looking into the guidance that it lacked that behavioural specificity and that real actionability. And it's a very common reason why well-intentioned guidance doesn't always translate into practice. The people are much more likely to act when guidance is concrete rather than abstract, and knowing how to do something, not just what's recommended, can increase parents' psychological capability, which is really, really important. And it also can reduce the intention-action gap. Often we might agree with guidance and advice, but we might struggle to act on it. And getting more specific can really help with that. And specificity is especially important for first-time parents, those with lower digital literacy, parents under particular cognitive load, and those families already anxious about doing things wrong. And both behavioural science and public health guidance agree that clarity is an equity intervention in itself. So let's start by unpicking the basics when we want to get more specific. Olivia, I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about when we say screens. It seems like a really obvious question, but what are we actually referring to? What are children asking for today when they say they want screen time?
So they're asking for anything that's on a screen. In the longer guidance that was published by the advisory group, they said they included TVs, so the big telly on the wall, tablets, laptops, phones. They did not include consoles for under fives, but I actually think they should be included because often you might connect a Switch or a PlayStation to the big telly and it's still a screen. And obviously for children themselves, they don't care where they're consuming stuff. It's the same video, whether they're watching it on a tablet, whether they're watching it on telly, whether they're watching it on mummy's phone when they're out. And so one of the other things the group advised was to call it screen use. It shouldn't just be about the length of time you're on it. It's how are you using a screen? And so it's very much platform and device agnostic. So one of the things that I think came through quite clearly was about sort of time boxing what your screen use is, you know, saying, well, if it is up to an hour, how can you carve that out into 20-minute episodes? How long is an episode of Bluey? How long is that YouTube video? We can talk a bit later about things like what those settings are, but also the problem with autoplay on YouTube or some of the streaming services means that time box 20 minutes might suddenly become 40. We've all been there. So it's also thinking about how you're using the screen that you've got in front of you, and whether the content you're actually consuming it could be a TV episode, but kids might not call it that anymore. It could be a nursery rhyme, it could be a song, and obviously we can talk about games as well.
Great, thank you, Olivia. That's really helpful. And one of the things I really noticed when we were looking into kind of getting specific is there's lots in there about slow-paced content. Bring my snail back. Slow-paced content, which is a technical judgment. It's not something that we all inherently understand. My worry is that it requires parents to interpret what that means. They have to kind of mentally asking themselves, you know, what counts as slow-paced content compared to what is this program okay or not? And that can really increase that cognitive load that I mentioned already. And also those decisions are often being made under stress and pressure, which we know is often when screens are used most. And the risk there as well is that parents could default to convenience, so thinking about what's familiar or what's the child's preference rather than kind of referring back to the guidance. And we've also all been guilty, I think, of that sort of post hoc rationalization. Oh, it will probably be fine. We've seen this before. It feels okay. Let's just kind of go with that. And so if we could get really specific again about, Jane, if you could tell us a bit kind of what are the TV programs in particular that really are about slow-paced content? What does that look like in practice, and how can a parent recognise it when it appears on screen?
Yeah, I thought it may be helpful on that just to talk through the kind of elements that would make something kind of fast or slow paced, because I think that's, you know, kind of quite hard to understand. So I've picked out a few visual features that appear on screen. So the first being colours. So that would be how bright or saturated colours are and how broad the colour palette is. So for example, on something like Gabby's Doll's House on Netflix, the colours are very saturated and bright, as opposed to something like Twirlywoos on CBeebies, which has a more limited colour palette and is a bit more muted and feels a bit calmer. The other visual feature could be shot length. So that's how long we stay on a camera shot for before cutting to the next shot. So for something like on Paw Patrol, the shot length is on average in an episode 2.89 seconds. So you change shot every 3 seconds, where something like Peppa Pig is 7.4 seconds on average in an episode. So that's obviously the action feels much slower. Then with camera movement, for example, a show like Cocomelon uses a lot of camera movement within that one shot. So the camera will be moving side to side or zooming in and out. And this combined with the characters moving as well makes it feel really fast. Whereas something like Bluey, although the characters will be moving, the camera tends to stay quite static, so the action feels slower and is kind of easier for children to follow. And then with scene changes, a show like, say, SpongeBob, will change scenes probably twice as fast as something like The Adventures of Paddington. Again, all these things combine to make things feel faster or slower. So that shows and why they might feel fast or slow. In terms of channels, UK channels like CBeebies and Sky Kids and Milkshake are regulated by Ofcom and are generally seen as more trustworthy. But that's just a rule of thumb, really. It's not a given, because those fast-paced shows are also shown on those channels. So really it comes down to parental judgment, I would say, across the board, whichever channel you go to, whatever screen you're looking at. It really comes down to your judgment on what feels fast and feels slow. I would say look out for shows that don't have too much movement, feel slower, have more calming colours, and you won't go too far wrong.
Thank you, Jane. And really helpful to get some specific programs in there so that practitioners and parents have got a reference point there for things to go and look for, perhaps stuff they haven't seen before, but they can go and enjoy with their children. Thank you. Let's move on now to framing. Framing is really important for thinking about how we describe something. So the government guidance mainly assumes reflective motivation. So that's parents thinking about limiting screen time for their children's kind of development and future success, and obviously about how they kind of build their brains. And whilst that's all really important and lots of parents will value that, it is a challenge when parents are kind of in the thick of it and thinking about the things that are right in front of them. They need help in the moment. They're busy dealing with what's right in front of them, not their child's long-term future in that moment. And we really found that when we were working with the Welsh Government on the language transmission programme. The Welsh Government guidance similarly talked about adding another string to their bow, thinking about job prospects, that sort of thing. And when we worked with parents and did focus groups and co-design, they told us, well, actually, they're just really busy changing nappies, handling meltdowns and navigating meal times. It's very hard for them to think about the big picture. So with that project, we developed a narrative on Welsh language transmission that was about finding moments of joy, sharing something nostalgic and creating bonds. And that's the stuff that we know parents actually care about and brings as much happiness to them as it does to their children. So I think the importance with this guidance really is to focusing not just on the limits of screen time, but actually what are you gaining from that? What are the immediate benefits? Is that about connection and interaction? Is it about helping children to feel seen and heard? Or maybe if that's too much for parents who are experiencing that cognitive load, it could be about engaging in shared screen time. And we've heard already from the guidance that actually that's a really positive way to enjoy screens, where parents are present, they're enjoying the content with their children. And that can be a really lovely bonding opportunity. And then finally, I suppose if parents are still feeling that they need that screen time so that they can go elsewhere and get stuff done, which we all know is important too, perhaps the focus and the framing should be on, well, how do we create calmer children, easier bedtimes, less tantrums? So there's lots of different ways that we can frame it that are not just that kind of deficit model of taking away screens, but what are we bringing in instead? What are we getting the benefits of? And this type of framing taps into intrinsic motivation, so the things that we want and that we need, rather than the compliance, which is more about what we ought to do. Jane, I wonder if you could tell us whether there's actually content out there. You've described some of the things that are age appropriate, but is there anything that you think is particularly good at calming children down? The advice says not to watch TV right before bedtime, so we're not obviously going to be encouraging that, but are there things that you think help children to regulate their emotions and to feel calmer, that parents could really see the benefit? Actually, if we watch this, then things are going to get easier for us.
Yeah, and I think it's fairly easy to spot kind of overtly educational shows. So things like Miss Rachel on YouTube, 123 Number Squad, Yakadee, all these shows that are overtly educational, which we think, oh, these are good for our children, or ones which explicitly promote physical activity, like Mr. Tumble, for example. But what's not so easy to spot are the ones that are not as overt. And I get that those shows could be seen as maybe a bit old-fashioned and not as appealing. But I would say the good news is that a lot of shows out there have what we call soft learning built in. So when I've worked on CBeebies shows, we're always very aware of trying to build in some sort of educational value without it being too overt or obvious. So those shows implicitly encourage imaginative play, speech and language development, social and emotional development, and physical activity. And there are lots of those shows out there. So My Friend Maisie, Hey Dougie, Pip and Posy, Puff and Rock, all those shows that have kind of family and friends settings that will encourage those social and emotional development and imaginative play. But going back slightly to the fast and slow-paced examples, it's not just about what's contained in those shows, but also the way those shows are presented is also key to whether children are going to engage with them meaningfully and get any benefit from them. So I would say that the ones to kind of look out for are shows that have a kind of clear, continuous narrative, because they're much easier to process what's happening. So something like Balamori or Peppa Pig, The Clangers, Moomin Valley, all have one storyline in an episode. They start at the beginning, they go to the end, they move through that story chronologically and continuously. They don't jump about all over the place. Those are much easier for children to process and you know, kind of, I guess, relax into. They don't have to make an effort to process what's going on. And that would be opposed to shows that jump about in time or in action or in space with multiple storylines that are much harder to follow. So shows like maybe Angry Birds or SpongeBob will jump from location to location, and they'll jump forwards and backwards in time. And that means children are left trying to work out what's happened in between. And obviously that takes much more mental effort. So that's the first thing I would think about. And secondly, if that story world is recognisable and relatable for children and based on real world physical rules, it's much easier to engage with and much easier to understand. So something like Peppa Pig. Now, obviously, we're talking about talking pigs here, but let's leave that to one side. So where the characters walk and talk and skip and jump and play and go to nursery and drive cars and live in houses, that's much easier for children to relate to than something fantastical that doesn't follow those physical rules. So where characters fly, for example, like Spidey and his amazing friends, or walk through walls or become invisible, that takes much more mental effort for children to make sense of. So I think if we're looking for content that's calming and takes much less effort, as a parent, I would be looking for those single narrative stories that are set in a more realistic world. That would be more beneficial because they're basically easier to understand.
Great, thank you, Jane. It's really helpful, and again, really helpful to have that specificity coming through those programs. Olivia, we talked a bit now about this sort of joint attention and doing things together. I know you've got lots of experience in the gaming world, and it's interesting that you mentioned in the guidance that actually consoles are not classified as being part of that sort of screen time, when actually we know that that's an important part of how children engage with screens. I wonder if you could tell me about any kind of age-appropriate content that children and parents can play with together, that they're having fun together, where we're getting that kind of motivation around it's screen time, but it's something we do as a family. What's good for that?
Yeah, no, I like what you were talking about, the sort of bonding family experience. So there's games that are about co-play. So parent and child can play together, or the whole family can play together, and then there's lots of interaction. And I think that's really important for children to also see their parent having fun and playing with them. In the past, we used to talk about watching TV was quite passive, playing games was quite active, and I think that's all been thrown up in the air a little bit, because now you can do anything, you know, on a tablet. So lots of games that could encourage turn taking. So Jane was talking a bit about educational content, whether it's explicitly educational, so number blocks or phonics, but also soft learning, ones that are actually encouraging the child to do one thing and then the parent to do another, are really good. If we want to get into specifics, there are some really good Switch games that encourage a sort of adult mode for the parent and a child mode for the child. So we worked on a game once called Gigantosaurus, where there was actually much easier things for the kids to do and much harder things for the sort of hardcore gaming parents to do, and that was really good fun, because the kids liked that they could actually score quite well, and dad didn't do so well. We also had there's a few Bluey games now, and there's a Bluey game on Switch which did have a brilliant thing where the children could actually control the parents by going on their shoulders. So if you were playing as Bluey and Bingo, you go on the shoulders of whoever's playing as Bandit and Chili, maybe it's your mum and dad, and you can start controlling them. So again, there's lots of co-play, lots of fun, lots of laughter. And so I think that's what's quite crucial. The other thing I noticed in the guidance, when they're trying to be specific, saying under 2 shouldn't, you know, necessarily even be watching stuff, but talking about looking at family photos. I think that's one thing that's quite important about having the shared experience of saying it's not an isolating experience. We're sitting together, we're calling granny, whatever it is. And then I think the other bit is around how there is some evidence, which they covered a little bit, that if it is age appropriate, it is helping with learning development, it is helping with emotional development. So again, it's always that thing of whichever game you're playing, don't beat yourself up that your child shouldn't be on it, because there probably are some benefits, particularly if they're playing with you or with an older sibling. The other one I was just thinking about as well is active play, which Jane mentioned. Obviously, there's ones that can encourage singing and dancing. There's programs like Yoga with Jamie on Sky Kids. But there's also a new console out this summer in the UK that I've tested with, which is called Next Playground. So for the older people here, you could probably think of it like a Wii. You're having to do stuff in front of a screen and dance and try and fit into different shapes. And that's been brilliant because, again, it's getting the children up and active, but it would still count as doing something on the screen with their favourite characters and their friends, whether that's Gabby or Bluey or Ninja Turtles. So there are lots of options out there, but I think the key emphasis is on co-play. And I know that's the frustration sometimes for parents, because you just do need, 5 minutes to actually get the dinner on.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, really great examples of how parents can get involved in their children's games. And yeah, some lovely characters there that will feel really familiar, especially like the idea of the Bluey on the shoulders, because there's that squash episode, isn't it, where they're controlling dad and uncle playing their game, so that I'm sure children would love to play that.
There's squash on the Next Playground for Bluey, actually. It's a very fun. So yeah, you get to play squash, you get to play tennis, all those sort of things, if you imagine. So they're really good fun.
Great, thank you. Joss, how have you managed in the work that you do with children to turn screen time into more of a shared endeavour? How do you make it a bonding experience when you do give the children you work with an opportunity to use screens?
By building on connection when it comes to like supporting my children's emotions. And that looks like them not using TV to self-soothe, because a lot of our children will have programs they watch and their emotions will go up and down and won't be in control at all. And what I've used to reframe it is music, because I DJ as well, DJ for a very long time. So me and my children have different playlists to set our moods, get dressed playlists, dinner time playlists, and also used music to talk about how we feel. And then we also go on Spotify and Apple Music and find the soundtracks to the programs that we like. And then it builds conversation and connection around the programs. So when it goes back to watching the TV, there's even more to speak about. And then we also talk about how did that song get made, and what do you think if we put the Bluey soundtrack on the Peppa Pig soundtrack, what would it sound like? And then we sometimes even DJ in the house with it as well. And it really builds on them understanding that a TV is fun, because the whole screen time conversation can put a drag on TV and make us feel like we're bad parents and bad nannies and bad adults for even having TV in the house. Where I grew up watching TV, I support families that have no screens in the house, and it works for them, and it's an amazing environment. But we also don't look at the parents that have TVs as unhealthy environments. It's also finding the balance and the language to kind of support it. Other things I do is I now have a 4-year-old who now allows me to watch David Attenborough with her. It's taken 4 years to have my one get used to watching bumblebees and tigers, and she loves it. I showed her it in last half term before it, and she was so excited. She drew pictures about it. She wanted to phone her granddad. She told her mum, told her dad about it, and it was quite tearful. It was like, I've been trying to introduce you children to wildlife programs for like 18 years now, and I finally found one 4-year-old that is in it. And she got a little bit scared because they had like a 4K GoPro go into the beehive and kind of get swarmed by wasps, and there was a big fight and bees died. But she learned so much. We built connection, it was also a health now fun use of TV, and she never knew that these programs existed. And now she's kind of on TV looking for different programs of animals that she thinks she likes. And now we're now going out into the garden looking for bees to save. So it kind of, the language now has become even faster than it originally was, from just watching one program to having more programs that bring joy. Also bring a lot of my childhood favorites in. Like, it took me years to get my children to like Little Rascals and like all the Disney programs that we grew up on. And now I'm able to show them what I liked and what I grew up on. And we talk about it. Where when I first started the two girls that are cast now, that's 8 and 4 years ago, the conversation was about talking to them about what they're watching, so we can actually see if they're actually understanding what they're watching and not just watching it. And that worked well when we now talk about our programs, and we talk about what part of the program was our favorite part. And what one thing I did do a lot of with them is, when it was time to turn off the TV and transition, is what episode was it, what time was it, and what scene was it, so we can write it down and save it. And that also then led us into reading and writing and maths, and then coming back to it. And as much as sometimes there's timestamps that save, we was now working out how to rewind and go back and find specific spots. And that's how we kind of reframe the conversation around having screens in the house. And it kind of, parents no longer feel bad. I no longer feel bad, because I'm here to do a job. I'm here to care. I'm not here to watch TV. I've also felt bad for watching TV with the kids sometimes, and I end up finding 101 things to do. And the mum and dad are like, no, Josh, you can sit down and chill, because I feel guilty now. So it's kind of making the environment more feasible for all of us, because there's a guilt for all the adults involved, and the children now manage the transitions well when it comes to turning TV off to move to something else, whether it's bedtime. And they also understand that we don't have TV in the week. We've got homework and we've got things to do in the week. TV's a Friday and a weekend thing. It's not a luxury. It just becomes a distraction for us. And I talk to the children about distractions, and they understand TV does distract us. Sometimes they tell me off checking emails during dinner time because I think they're not watching me. Said, Josh, you're distracted, put your emails away. And I've given them the autonomy to tell me to put your phone down. And I give them the autonomy to do the same thing, and vice versa. And it's kind of just built a relationship around screens that's become very, very healthy for us to manage. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Joss. And we will talk a little bit about role modeling later, so hold that thought. That's super helpful. But yeah, I love all the ways in which you're getting conversation in with TV time, but also finding things that you enjoy that you can share with the children in your care as well. That's super important, because yeah, as you say, we've all grown up with TV, things that are important to us, nostalgia, things we'd love to watch again, but also we can discover new things together as well, which is really, really lovely. I'm going to now talk a bit about defaults. So this is the idea of parents currently are being asked by the guidance, I suppose, to actively manage the content, the timing, and the quantity. And that can be really difficult for parents to manage, because they've got a lot to think about already, and they can be quite stressed thinking about, well, how long have they been watching? Is this the right thing? Have we got the right controls in place? And behavioural evidence suggests that defaults matter more than intention. So if you can kind of set defaults in place, so automatic screen limits or in-app timers, ensuring autoplay is off, because we know sometimes these things can roll and roll and roll, and making sure that child profiles are on as standard, then it can take some of that cognitive load away. And also kind of creating a language around default options. You know, Joss, you mentioned already about kind of when screens are and aren't in use. If you're really clear about that and saying screens are off at meal times in this house, or we only watch screens on a Friday, or whatever it might be, then you're making that really clear from the get-go. It's that sort of environmental restructuring that's really important. It really helps parents to kind of have less choice, less to worry about, because the architecture is in place to guide them, because the environment has been designed to support parents. Jane, how can parents utilise tools on apps like BBC iPlayer to ensure they're sticking to programmes that are age appropriate, and also that have that kind of time-bound factor as well?
Yeah, so I had a look at a few different apps, and the good news is that they all have parental controls. So iPlayer and Channel 5 apps both have PIN protection for any shows that are on those channels that have kind of guidance labels. So in order to watch something that's got a guidance label, you have to put in a PIN. And that's obviously really useful if children stray off the CBeebies channel or the Milkshake channel on their apps. With Netflix, you can set up profiles for individual children and set maturity ratings and block specific shows and titles within those profiles, which is obviously really helpful. Sky Kids has a specific kids app which points you to age appropriate content, and you can also set a kid safe mode on your Sky box if you have one of those. So that's kind of more traditional channels. But YouTube has also created it's what it calls its own quality principles for children's content, which it says guides recommendations on YouTube and YouTube Kids towards what they call higher quality videos. And they also conversely reduce the visibility of low quality content. So that's anything is kind of highly commercial, sensational, or encourages negative behaviours. That's less likely to be recommended on those apps. And that app has a lot of other features. The YouTube Kids app, it lets parents approve specific content or select from age appropriate content. They can also turn off the search function, block specific videos or channels, and also you can keep an eye, you can set screen time limits, which I think is really useful. So yeah, all of these channels and all these apps have a lot of tools that parents can use to kind of curate their children's viewing and keep an eye on the length of time they're on there. I think, as Joss said, it's also really key if you can just set those times within your household as well, because all these apps, setting all these things up, you know, that takes time. So I think if you can be specific out with that as well, that's going to be really helpful.
Thanks, Jane. And Olivia, what are some of the ways that games can be made safe? I feel that the gaming world is somewhere where parents are particularly nervous, or maybe have right to be, because there's obviously an opportunity to talk to people online when you're gaming. So for those very little children, 0 to 5, how can parents ensure that if they are playing games, that those are safe for them to play?
So they can first look at the ratings. So if they're on a console, there's a PEGI rating of age 3. So anything that is from a well-known preschool brand would be 3+. There are some that are 7+ that you could possibly look at for this age group, but really stay safe with the 3+. And I think the value that isn't sometimes appreciated about console games is you are then playing that one game. You're playing your Peppa Pig game, your Paw Patrol game, your Hey Duggee game, without having to worry about straying off anything else, because it's a cartridge and it's in there and that's it. So that's one aspect. If you are downloading apps that you want for your child on a tablet or a phone, there are App Store ratings. So Apple will have 4+, Android has 3+. But and to be fair, that Android and Apple are pretty good at checking stuff and moderating it. But again, just think about, you know, the developer has put stuff through. If it's something that, again, is a brand that is already slow paced, like a bit of Pepper, a bit of Hey Duggee, anything from CBeebies, you're probably safe. But it's just to be aware that when you go into that app, you need to make sure what those settings are within your actual device. And I think that's the thing that Jane was coming back to. There's often too much onus on the parent to have to do all these things, and we'd really like the platforms to be doing more about it. If we want specifics of other games, look out for Toca Boca, Sago Mini, anything from Story Toys, Lingo Kids. All of those are really good, really child-centered. They've thought about language development. They've thought about the pace. They thought about it being age-appropriate. And then console games, things that are for Gabby's Doll's House, PJ Masks, even Cocomelon, they are at least age-appropriate in terms of the content. They may not have some of the pace that Jane's been talking about, and obviously number blocks. So I think the only concern I've got around thinking, you know, about all those settings is things like even YouTube Kids, you have to be active and go in and turn off autoplay, for example. You have to be active and go in set all those things and say, well, actually, we don't want any Cocomelon at the moment, and we don't want compilations, we just want standalone episodes. So I think it is a little bit frustrating for parents and for all of us that the industry, the platforms aren't doing enough. There's been a study recently that shows that actually the big platforms, the Meta, Google, TikTok, Snapchat, they're being less good at doing good design by default for parents and families. And so the big four have sort of given up and have said, oh, we're reliant on parental tools. Is that fair when, you know, you're a very busy parent and you're really struggling with how to, and, you know, kids can find their ways around it. The other one that we have very much, I don't think it was even in the report, but because they're almost too new, is things like AI chatbots, AI toys. I think at the moment it's very much don't go there if you can. Yeah, that's one area that it just hasn't been tested. And well, there have been reports saying some of it's not safe at all. And then the other area that I still hear about anecdotally is under fives being allowed on Roblox. And I really think, I personally, and I think others would say, Roblox just isn't appropriate for under fives. Roblox are saying they're trying to make things safer, turning off chat functions for under nines, that sort of thing. But I just think, you know, the games that are on there are often created and moderated by the people making them, and they might say they're appropriate, but they're really not for real little ones. So I think just exercise caution, go with sort of brands and that you know well, but at the same time it is feeling frustrating, I think, for parents that they're having to sort of unpick how to make sure that something as innocuous as you know, watching Pepper on YouTube is safe.
Yeah, thank you. Really helpful. Joss, you talked a little bit about this, but I wonder if you can say just a touch more about how you sort of structure the environment around the children that you look after, so that actually the screens just aren't the focus, they're not the go-to thing. How do you make sure that children have got other interests and things that they're reaching for?
Supporting parents on learning how to manage their own capacities, because a lot of these conversations, the screens come from parents not being able to manage their own emotions, their own overwhelm and their own stresses. And that's a conversation we don't usually talk about. How can we support parents in managing so parents have the tools to be able to play? I know a lot of parents, sadly, that in their eyes aren't good at playing with their children. And that's when the use of a screen comes in. So engaging parents in our play sometimes, so parents can pick up the tools that the children are showing us that they need, and the tools that I have that I bring into play as well. And also that looks like when I come in, I put my phone down on charge and I leave it, and mum and dad can't get hold of me, and if they have to call my phone for me to see it and find it. And I specifically let my children know my phone's away from me, so we have to role model behaviour and be intentional with our movements with our children. Other things like we do a lot of play talking about TV, so we role play our favourite TV shows. We love Investigators. Investigators is amazing. We're all spies right now in the house, and we're all investigators, and we're in the garden doing investigating stuff. And we pretend we're in Australia, and what would Australia be like if we was in school and our friend stole our shoe and we couldn't find our best friend that stole our shoe. And it's also mirroring play and mirroring what we see on our TVs and using what we see on our TVs to our best advantage. And it really builds language and connection in ways that sometimes you can't always get without TV, because sometimes TV can be such a great tool if you use it wisely. Other things I do is immersing myself in children's play and kind of getting lost in the moments and using those moments to create bigger moments. And I video us a lot. I've got a lot of GoPros and gimbals and 360 cameras because I make content, and I get children's consent firstly and parents' consent to set up these cameras, and we film ourselves doing stuff, and then we edit it together, because some of my children are very literate, so I've given them a Adobe Premiere account, and we log in and we edit our videos together, send them to family and WhatsApps. And sometimes good screen time is us watching back our videos. I've got 4 years worth of videos of our children that we've watched back together now, and now my children now are learning how to edit their videos, and not edit it and spruce it up, but edit it and make a funny transition and add an elephant into it. But our rule of thumb is we're not allowed to use filters. We're not changing how we look in these videos, we're changing what's happening in these videos. A big difference, because then conversations come around about body dysmorphia and I want to change how I look, etc. And no, we can make you into an alien or we can make you into a bird, but we can't change how you look because you're not happy with how your hair looked in that clip. And one of those moments have become so meaningful where that we're even now able to create private YouTube links of our content with our children. So children think they're little YouTubers and realize this link is only for family and friends. So where we're having battles with our children thinking they want to be YouTubers or not, we can make them YouTubers, but only on a platform that's only used by everyone that's got that specific link safely. And that's sometimes a great way to aid the conversation with our older children that want to be online and be seen. You can be seen by grandma, you can be seen by your cousins, but that's only people that are going to see you with this link. And they kind of, they enjoy that process of being able to kind of feel like they feel like they're even safer now and talk about the safety of having only family see it. And it works out really well because they sometimes be like, Josh, can I look at our old videos? And we're now talking about time and family and connection, and they're able to reflect and see how they look when they was younger. And then sometimes there's moments caught on camera where they might have been behaving in a way where they were triggered by something. Can we talk about when we're triggered by our emotions? And do you remember what we did in the video and get the video back up and be like, should we do that way again or should we do this way? So the video has become a tool that we all use within our transitions and our moments. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Those sound like really healthy conversations and really, again, really nice ways to use screens in a positive way. Let's talk about social norms. The guidance feels kind of is avoiding social comparison in an effort, I guess, to be non-judgmental. But there is a place for social norms to be used in a supportive way, as long as the examples are grounded in the guidance. For example, those of you who are practitioners on the call today, you might want to talk to the parents you work with and saying, you know, many parents find, for example, that one shared program after school works better than constant on and off screen time. So you kind of make the point that this is something that lots of parents do. And what's really important that as well is that parents see families like themselves represented in those examples so they can really make a difference, landing that message if they know that actually families like me do things in this way. It's also important when taking this approach that parents feel that their struggles are recognised. So you might want to say to parents, and most parents tell us that screens are hard to manage, and particularly hard to manage when we're feeling tired or busy. You're not alone. So social norming the problem as well as the solution can be helpful. And this helps to reduce that guilt and shame and normalises the difficulty, whilst hopefully increasing the perceived feasibility of some of the things that we've been discussing today. Rhiannon, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how parents react to one another. Presumably the platform on Mumsnet is used in that way to kind of share ideas and tips, but maybe some of that is helpful and some of it can lead to that kind of guilt and shaming that we know happens between parents sometimes when someone's got a great idea but it's not very well received.
Yeah, I mean, as in most scenarios, if you're struggling with something, it is not helpful to hear about how somebody else is absolutely nailing it and getting it right and achieving perfection every time. I think parents do find that unhelpful. And we don't see loads of that on Mumsnet because parents come to us with their problems, and they want to talk to other parents. And actually, what's useful on there, I think, is there is just a huge amount of kind of empathy and shared experience and lots of parents saying, I am struggling with this. There are very few instances, and I spent quite a lot of time this week looking at the conversation, but there are very few instances of parents who say, actually, I'm great at this and I don't have any concerns. Like, that's just not happening. I think in terms of what kind of resonates most in those conversations is, like, firstly, that kind of recognition of like nuance and trade-off, and the fact that there are these competing pressures, and that like parents might kind of simultaneously recognize that like too much screen time is problematic, but also screens can be useful and life is overwhelming, and like finding a balance between all of those things is really, really important. And I think that point you made, Emily, about like recognition of difficulty is really important. And parents want the challenges recognized. You know, they're juggling like work and childcare, like often caring for multiple children, trying to get through difficult periods of family life, and they're also knackered. So anything that doesn't really acknowledge those issues when you're trying to help parents with this, I think is likely to be unhelpful. And then I think that the third thing that's really helpful, and which comes across in the conversations, is like practical examples rather than just abstract advice. So when other parents say, oh, this is what we do around bedtimes, or this is how we handle screens on long journeys, or when we're cooking, or this is what we did when we reduced screen time to kind of, you know, tackle the issues around that. Other parents find that really helpful. So I think those practical examples are really important. And then just in terms of like what's not helpful, I think like the idea that of kind of reducing this to like individual parental failure, and again we've talked about it a bit before, but the idea that like if you're getting this wrong, you're just a bad parent, without recognizing all of the kind of external factors. And I think that goes back a little bit to what Olivia and Jane were both saying about, you know, how tech companies are not necessarily making it as easy as they could for parents to handle this. You know, why wouldn't certain settings be on by default, preventing kids from, you know, like watching videos that run on for hours? You know, there are so many things outside of parents' control that would actually make a difference. And so I think if discussions are focusing entirely on like what parents are doing inside the home, that can often also be quite frustrating, because they also want acknowledgement of the fact that what's happening in educational settings, what big tech are deciding to do with their products, you know, how the government is regulating things, they all kind of feed into this conversation as well. So I think it's really important to recognise that.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's now talk about something called implementation intentions. So this is about making it easier for people to plan and act on the things that they really want to do. So the intention in the guidance, they talk about safe screen swaps. And that's a section that's good, but could be made stronger, because it doesn't necessarily give people the tools to kind of act on those intentions. What we tend to use in behavioural science thinking is this kind of if-then planning. So, for example, encouraging parents to use phrases like, if it's after bath time, then screens stay off. If a program has lots of quick cuts or loud music, then we choose something else. So it's about anticipating those high-risk moments, whether that's bedtime, mealtime, sibling conflict, and deciding in advance what the alternative is going to be before the time when the stress or conflict with the screens arises. And this actually, similar mentioning before the Welsh language work that we did, we looked at how early parents can make those intentions and those plans. And as I mentioned, that was about the intention to speak Welsh with their children. But we found that it was interesting talking about this idea between the couple, even before the baby had come along, before all the chaos of parenting, but actually making a plan together. This is how we're going to do that. This is the plan that we're going to put in place. And that's really important, because you're trying to anticipate the future and trying to make those plans before things get more complicated and get more stressful. Joss, I wonder how clear it is for the children that you look after that are in your care, those sort of rules and boundaries about what they can watch, and how you manage that situation where you mentioned already where the parents of the children you care for are maybe doing things slightly differently. Like, does that ever create a bit of conflict? So how do you set those rules and those boundaries? And do children really get that from you and understand what is and isn't okay?
It's funny, for everyone that's a parent here, you know, the moment when you have a conversation with your child and you realize they do listen to you when they've said something that you've taught them, and they kind of relay it back when we're watching that Netflix and we're flicking through stuff, and then we stop on something. Oh, mummy said we can't watch it. Daddy said we can't watch that. Mummy and daddy said that isn't good for our emotions. And I'm like, yes, you do listen. And that in itself, it's amazing to see parents doing the work, because I know how hard the work is. That's why I'm here to support them. I'm not a parent, but I get it. And what it does look like, if at times we're not in alignment with what our choices are for the kids, is I'm okay. I don't understand what it's like to be a parent, but I understand what it's like to have to be responsible for someone. So I don't mind giving towards a parent's choice if it doesn't go against my own moral standard and making me super uncomfortable, where there's not much things that I choose for children that parents don't choose for. It's that choose as well. Like, I play child-friendly music at work, and I make sure it's child-friendly music with the message that they're saying, the words and the vocabulary they're using, and I make sure, etc. And what it looks like with TV shows is, our rule of thumb is there's no TV in the week. For the last 2 months, me, mum, and dad have realised that when I come in from school run with the children, oh, let's watch TV, Joss. No, let's not watch TV. I don't know where this change of energy has come from. Last week, the girls sometimes go and get changed and do stuff themselves, and they sometimes want to give granddad and grandma a show before they leave. And they said to us, so we're going to go and create a show. Come and find that, we'll come and get you in 10 minutes. 20 minutes have gone, and I've given them grace thinking, hey, like, they're doing something amazing. Well, they're watching TV. And they've sneaked off and watched TV. And me and granddad in the kitchen having a conversation, waiting for them, thinking they're getting ready to come and find us. And we have to have a big conversation around trust and now being sneaky, because the issue isn't now watching TV, it's the fact that you've gone behind our backs and you use the moment of where we're trusting you to make the right choices, to make the choices that you should be making, which also makes a conversation for, we now realise that sometimes teaching our children around trust is a bigger issue than actually talking about it. And that gave us a bigger teachable moment. And mum and dad heard the conversation I said when I sent them the WhatsApp message, and I had to reassure them to not feel bad, because sometimes as parents you can feel guilty and be like, oh my god, my child's a liar, what have I created, etc. I said to mum and dad, it's just them being kids, they're doing their job. We're here to support them to not do certain jobs, and that's how it kind of looks like. And they was also watching something they shouldn't be watching as well, so it made the conversation even more difficult to have. And I'm now feeling like a bad nanny, like, oh my god, what have I done to give them this space and this time to make the wrong choices, when we all had a guilt trip moment and we all had to kind of have a family conversation. And then my rule of thumb is talk to the children 2 days later about what they've done 2 days before, rather than in the moment, because we get a better conversation out of them and get a better resolve, and the children can be more reflective and more understanding to the choices they've made, and really understand that that isn't what they should do. And if they have trouble with making the wrong choices, let us know that it's tricky right now, so we can support your trickiness. So yeah, that's what we do with it.
Thanks, Joss. That sounds like a really sensible process to go through. And Olivia, you obviously work with the Children's Media Foundation as well. I wonder whether you've had any conversations in that space around working with health visitors or midwives, getting that conversation started early about screen time, because it feels like something that can wait, right? Children, when they're very, very tiny, there's much more of a focus on their health and their development, and this TV stuff comes later. But actually, it can start really early, can't it? So I wonder how we can start to have those conversations with professionals, some of those who might be on the call today, and thinking about if parents are asking them questions, what's the right advice that they can give at the right moment.
Yeah, I think you're right that actually it is a conversation to be had when you're actually pregnant rather than afterwards, but obviously it is quite hard. So the Children's Media Foundation have submitted a quite weighty document to the BBC Charter Renewal, which you can go and look at on their website. And we've put children's digital identity at the centre of that. That's something that the BBC themselves have been asking for, around how can the BBC have a greater role in media education. But we want to put children right at the centre of sort of how we envisage the BBC going forward. And so one of the things we've proposed is a red book for children. So like the red book you get just after you've had your baby, when you leave the hospital, it's got all their vaccinations, NHS number, all the rest of it. It's got stuff in there about health visitors and early years education. And we think there should be something in there to help parents set those expectations around screen use. You know, the one I have, my son's now a teenager, had stuff about book start. I don't know what the ones now have. And so along the same lines is saying, you know, what's the best start in life for your little one? And one of those is around how you think about what the content is, but what their screen use is as well. And the only thing I was thinking about with this is that can be tricky is once you have more kids, you know, when we go into I do testing in houses where once you've got 2 or 3 kids, the little ones are obviously influenced by the old ones who are suddenly on a console or on a device in their own way. So I think there's also thinking about how do you introduce it gradually once you've got your family is growing. But yeah, we definitely would love to work with health visitors in early years to look at how, you know, we can almost sort of be responsible for children's digital well-being. And I think there's also, because there's a lot of conversations at the moment as well about children's digital privacy. Things have flipped so much, you know, not to share on social media. There's all these awful apps being used for child abuse and youth. So again, there's a whole sort of area we can be looking at in terms of how can we empower parents to feel that children can feel safe online, but also that what they're having fun, you know, all the things we talked about, there's still joy, there's still co-play, there's still talking to family, and those things are important as well.
It's really great to hear that that conversation has started and that there are different organisations thinking about how to tackle the problem together. That's great. We've just got a couple more of these, and then we're going to open it up to the Q&A. So this one is about validation, and actually maybe this is something we should have said right at the start, because it's definitely been woven through in the conversation so far. The government guidance does make an effort to recognise how hard modern life is, but it doesn't perhaps fully recognise and acknowledge screens as coping tools. And that is something that we've all mentioned now. And we know that for many parents, they're juggling financial worries, insecure housing, poor mental health, relationship stress, exhausting work. And these devices that are obviously present in all aspects of our life, whether we're out and about or in the home, and they are used as coping tools. Parents feeling stressed and exhausted, they might hand over a screen, and then they get that sort of quiet moment to either focus on something else or just take a breath for themselves. And so I think that guidance needs to validate the function that screens serve, as they often give parents that space. And on that basis as well, any substitutes that we're suggesting, whether that's reading or listening to audio stories or some of the play that Joss has described, does also need to feel kind of low effort for parents, because we know that they're already struggling. It does feel like devices are being used in that way. Jane, do you think that we've sort of fallen out of love with TV? It's interesting today, lots of people have talked about how much they love it and how much passion we get from it. But instead of a leisure pursuit, do you think that some parents are using it just as a prop for stress relief and time management? What sort of changed in the way we consume content online, or sorry, on TVs in recent years?
I mean, anecdotally, I think TV's always been used as a time management tool. I had my kids in the 1990s, and that's exactly what I used it for. And I had all the associated guilt. But those children have all grown up to be fully functioning adults in their 20s and 30s and are absolutely fine. And I don't remember my mum sitting watching the telly with us in the 1970s. So I think that hasn't changed. I think what has changed is the accessibility and the nature of what today's children are watching. So obviously, in terms of accessibility, we've gone from that one static device, a TV, in the living room, to multiple devices that we carry around wherever we go. And we've gone from those kind of programmes being scheduled at specific times by the broadcasters. This is what's on telly for your children at specific times. We've gone from that to things, you know, videos on demand 24 hours a day. So those broadcasters used to create children's viewing and the number of programmes they could watch and the times they could watch. The onus, as we've mentioned several times, is now on parents to manage this, and so no wonder I think that must feel really overwhelming. And I think the other key thing that has changed is traditionally between episodes on a scheduled channel, there were natural breaks, which gave children a bit of breathing space, or something would come on the telly that they didn't like and they would move away from the telly. Whereas now apps tend to push content continuously. So as soon as one episode of a favourite show finishes, the next one begins, and that just goes on and on and on. So whether that's episodes or whether that's clips, and on platforms like YouTube, you know, you'll have multiple clips compiled into videos that go on for a long time. There's just no breathing space for kids. So the onus again is on parents to kind of create those gaps and create that breathing space. with the sorts of activities that maybe Joss is talking about. So in fact, it's probably better for children to sit and watch down a full movie with a clear narrative and then have a break. Right, we're going to watch this movie, then we're going to have a break, we're going to go off and do something else, rather than just sitting watching a compilation of short clips that could literally go on forever. But as we've said, you know, that means that parents have to actively, unfortunately, it's down to the parents again to actively manage that.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. And Rhiannon, what evidence have you seen on Mumsnet that this is how screens are being used, this idea of it being a coping mechanism with people being busier than ever, and with screens being more mobile than ever? I often imagine, you know, we talk about the supermarket scenario, you know, where you have a classic meltdown, and in the past there was not very much you could do, but now if you've got your phone, you're probably quite likely to whip it out and use it as a tool to cope with that situation. So do you find that that's often how parents are using screens now?
Yeah, and I think, you know, they're talking about screens, particularly portable screens, as a tool rather than like as an entertainment device. You know, it comes up all the time. I think some of the areas that most mentioned, like meal times and cooking, particularly, you know, to give yourselves half an hour to like cook dinner, do the packed lunches for tomorrow, clear up, you know, tidy up after meals, comes up a lot in that. Also, and I mentioned this before, like caring for multiple children, you know, a lot of the guidance seems to assume that like one parent is looking after one child, when actually, you know, the likelihood is that you are juggling more than one child, potentially like often different ages. You know, you might have a baby, an older child, a toddler, so trying to manage all of those children at once and juggle all of the other bits of your life is really difficult, and that's where screens can be really useful and where parents use them. And then I think the other thing that comes up a lot, and like obviously there's some wording in the guidance around like children with additional needs and neurodiversity and those kind of exceptional circumstances, but also the kind of like more sporadic exceptional circumstances. So we hear from parents a lot who, you know, when children are ill, when they're on long journeys, or they've got hospital appointments, or there's a family emergency, you know, portable screens are used a lot in those scenarios. And I think parents really do draw the distinction. Obviously, on television now, you can still access those short-term short form videos, and you still have the instance of them running on and that kind of thing. But a television in the corner of the room, even if you've got half an eye on the dinner that's cooking, you still might have an idea of what's happening on that, or you can hear it and you'll see the program running on. Whereas the portable devices, you know, if a child is looking at a tablet, it's much more difficult to kind of monitor that from a distance. So I think parents do draw a distinction, and that's where the difference between television and those kind of portable devices is really evident.
Yeah, thank you, Rhiannon. And yeah, you're absolutely right that you know, there are different moments when it becomes a real benefit, doesn't it? Particularly on a flight or something like that. And it's interesting you mentioned hospital appointments as well. And thank you also for mentioning special educational needs. I did mean to say at the start, we do recognise that the guidance for those children is different. And whilst none of us are experts here, we did just want to acknowledge that. Let's also now talk about salience. So this is our last point before we open up to Q&A. So something that we've all mentioned is around role modeling and the fact that we're, as adults, to some extent, a little bit addicted to our phones, and we have to be really mindful about how we use those around children. But there is an issue, I think, in terms of how salient that is for parents. We might not realise how often we're using our devices or how that's really affecting the children around us. We might not realise that that thing that they're saying to us we're not properly listening to, or we're not properly engaged in. So I think it's helpful for parents to think about the visual cues that encourage them to do things differently, to role model those behaviours better. So that might be, for example, if you want to have your phone near you when you're playing with your children or talking to your children, maybe putting it on the table face down. So that's saying to you and it's saying to the children with you that the phone is not in use. It's not being looked at. There's not just kind of one eye on it, that the child has your full attention. Or time-bound commitments. We've talked a lot about that with children, but maybe parents making those time-bound commitments for themselves as well, you know, 20 minutes of fully phone-free playtime. So again, the child knows that they've got your full attention. Those are really hard things to enact, but I think they're quite helpful for parents in giving them the cues that they need to behave in certain ways so that they can help and support their children in those moments. Rhiannon, have you spotted parents reflecting on their own use of technology as part of the challenge that they're facing? Is that something that parents are worried about as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes up a huge amount. And I think they really recognise that that kind of behavioural modelling is really important in how their children respond to screens. And I think there's a couple of things, like, first of all, obviously, and I think most of us will have some experience of this, the kind of the addictive nature of social media, and how you can quite easily sort of lose half an hour doom scrolling. And it's easy to do that no matter the situation. You know, if you've taken yourself off to the kitchen to cook dinner, but you've got your phone with you and you take a look, and before you know it, like 20 minutes have passed. I think we'll be kind of familiar with that sensation. But I think there's also the point that obviously for parents and adults, like, a lot of our life is contained on our phone, right? It's a useful tool. You might be responding to an email from school, you might be clearing up an urgent work matter, you might be like paying a bill, and all of those things we do on our phones now, which makes it much harder to kind of draw that distinction and say, you know, I won't look at my phone in the next couple of hours, because what if something happens that you need to deal with? And so I think parents do really recognize that, and I think that does prompt like a lot of self-awareness and guilt. And we do hear from parents a lot talking about, you know, worrying about whether they're kind of physically present but they're sort of mentally elsewhere, and they're reaching for their phone automatically and they're missing things. And I think, you know, some of it also goes down to like talking about your phone as a tool as well, like the idea that you are trying to, your automatic reaction is to take a picture of something rather than like living in the moment of what's happening. There's quite a lot of conversation about that on Mumsnet. And then also obviously there's talk about solutions. So again, some of these we've touched on already, but there's lots of examples of parents trying to change their own behavior at the same time as managing their kids' screen time. So having those kind of screen-free family periods, saying, you know, we don't have screens at mealtime, and that applies to all of us. I'm not going to get my phone out of my pocket. And having those periods of time where they say, I am just not going to check my phone, I am going to be completely present in this moment with my child. So yeah, I think there is definitely recognition of this, and there are parents trying to come up with ways to manage their own use because they recognise what an effect it has on their ability to also manage their child's screen time.
Yeah, thank you, Rhiannon. Yeah, definitely guilty of some of the things you described there. And Joss, how do you act as a good role model for the children in your care? I'm conscious that you're doing it as an employed person, so but I don't know if you have kind of extra controls in place in your mind of thinking, well, it's very, very, very important for me, or whether you sometimes slip into what we all do of just kind of getting the phone out and getting a little bit distracted. So how do you manage that?
Someone mentioned earlier watching movies, I think it was Jane Baxter, and I get triggered when I get openly triggered in my mind when I have the children. I'm like, oh, let's watch a film. They're like, no, let's watch a series. And I'm like, the little child in me that doesn't like watching series or I don't really enjoy children's programs either. So it's even harder for me to sit down and watch a back-to-back episode of Paw Patrol. And then I use that time to want to sneak on my phone in the corner of the sofa while the children are there. And I feel so bad for it. And it's something that I've been working on for years, and I've got much better at it. And in my head, I'm like, why wouldn't you want to watch Lion King? Like, it's a great film. And I've also had to remember that this generation of children don't have the capacity sometimes to watch a hour-and-a-half movie that they haven't watched before. So like, and I've realized how if you've grown your children to watch a Toy Story, watch Toy Story 2, 3, 4, Lion King 1, 2, 3, 4, they'll be happily open to watch movies, in comparison to now a generation of children that binge watch basically. And how I deal with, like, how I support myself in being a role model is actively doing it outside of work for myself, because I have to be intentional with my behaviors in life to be able to be aligned with who I really am and what I'm doing at work, because I'm the same person at home as I am at work, and it's easier for me to be like that. So when I come home, I watch a lot of TV, but I have a balance with what I watch. I love action film, I love Marvel, I love Die Hard. I've realised I can't watch them before bed because my senses heighten. If I'm hearing too much crash, bang, boom, I won't sleep properly. And I've had to realise that I'm very sensitive, and I have to watch something calmer or some comedy, or sometimes just no TV before bed, the same way I would do for my children. And I mirror that behaviour for myself because it actually makes sense to me now. Other stuff is intentionally not being on my phone. where a lot of my families now know it's hard to get hold of me when I'm with the kids because I don't check my phone as much as I would have did when I was a nanny when I was like 21 or 22. Now I'm more intentionally realizing that I can be addicted to this mobile and be with the kids and think I can multitask really well, but just because I can multitask just doesn't mean I should. And I've given the healthiest thing I have done is given my children the autonomy to tell me off. And to tell me, no, Josh, you're meant to not be on your phone. You're meant to be no screen time, man. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. As triggered as I am, I'll be like, I just apologize and just take it. And it's even when I have a child that doesn't have screens in his life, and it's the most beautiful interactions from 9 to 5 or 9 to 2:30 because he's just on. And when I actually immerse myself in his world of just being on, it's the best place to be out. It's the best place to ever be. To be able to be in a space where email or WhatsApp isn't the most important thing here. It's this child's imagination and this child's, like, he now said, Josh, can you play with me? Like, most children don't ask you to play with them. They just play. And he intentionally, we go soft play, and he said, Josh, can you come in and play with me? I need you. And I'm like, cool, my phone's going off. And that's when I've realized that my role here is actually very important in his world for the next 25 minutes. And that next 25 minutes of play can change how he plays. Where I can not interact properly and he can feel like he doesn't get played with enough and then not want to ask an adult for help anymore. So that's how I see the importance of actually being present and being intentionally present. And also but learning how to be present as well, because a lot of us adults haven't got a healthy relationship with being present with ourselves. So it kind of starts with how we give ourselves grace and work with our own capacities to kind of manage. So giving ourselves 20 minutes so we can give our kids 25 minutes. And it just kind of adds and adds and adds. And hopefully that kind of works over time.
Yeah, I really love what you're saying about actually doing that role modeling when nobody's watching. So I think we have that tendency sometimes to grab back that time and overdo it probably and spend more time on a phone. But what you're saying is that if we can be the same when we're with or without the children, then everybody benefits because those healthy habits are then much more embedded in everything we do. That's super, super helpful advice. We're going to move to the Q&A now. We've got lots of questions. Thank you. But just before we do, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that Claremont are really interesting in exploring further, and there might be people on this call that want to do the same. I think actually there's an additional one Olivia's mentioned around working with health visiting and midwifery and thinking about how we can get in early with those conversations with parents around screen time, which I think would be super interesting to explore further. But there's also, I think, from our perspective, something where we can co-design with parents, thinking about how we can create a version of this government guidance that's actually written by parents in a way that really has that lived experience very deeply embedded into it. It'd be really lovely to explore that in more detail. So it's a really kind of peer-owned product, not just something that is sort of top-down. And the other thing is sort of looking at how we can explore behaviour change upstream. Again, it's something that has been mentioned quite a lot, but it seems really important. Identifying and learning where are those bright spots within the industry where actually they are making it easier for parents, they are supporting that default to make it safer or to make it more age appropriate. If we can find those industry bright spots and really highlight what they're doing well and see what we can do to influence the rest of the industry, I think that'd be something that we'd love to explore as well. Of course, if we're open to other ideas, if you've got other things that you want to talk to Claremont about, we'd love to hear that too. So let's move to the Q&A. One of the questions that's come in is around sort of practical alternatives. What do speakers think about things like Tony's boxes and Yoto players and kids' smart speakers? I wonder whether, Olivia, you might want to start us off with that one.
Yeah, I think they're great. When I go and talk to families and I ask them, what do you like doing? Tony's and Yotos come up quite a lot, as do smart speakers. I was with a family the other week who are dancing to Alexa and having Tony's at bedtime. I think they're great because, they're not a screen and you're listening and you're sort of, again, in an imaginary world. And also that I think they're also an extension of a world, though. So I think what's nice about things like Yoto and Tony's is that they've taken lots of those well-known brands and the children are then learning to listen. Podcasts overall usage has gone up a lot as well, so that they're a really good alternative, and I think a lot of families use them at bedtime. The smart speakers, I think the only thing again is checking the settings of when you're asking for content that it feels age appropriate.
Thank you. Jane, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one, or would you have said something similar?
I think I would have said something similar. I think anything that encourages that co interaction, that kind of like co-play, that's, you know, fantastic.
Yeah, great. And Joss, you already mentioned, you know, the love of music, and I guess sort of smart speakers is probably part of how you do that play.
Yes, we love our Yoto boxes, and also Yoto boxes and the Tony boxes and Spotify Kids. A lot of people don't know Spotify Kids exists. You get it with a family premium account. And Spotify Kids is child curated content, podcast and music. So your child can have access to their own playlist that's only child friendly. And all my families have now got it. And it's a great way to also introduce children to music. We've got a generation of children that don't like music as well, because they've been so immersed in screens. And it's really helpful. And they then can find other content to go and buy for their Tony boxes, because they didn't realise that most stories now have a Tony version or a Tony box version. Yeah, quite helpful.
Yeah. There's a practical question about the device itself. Olivia, you started us off by saying that actually we're sort of quite agnostic about the types of screens now, but we're wondering whether there's any particular sort of pros and cons to the types of device that you're using in terms of the engagement and the impact that it's having on children. Is it better to be watching on a big screen, or you know, I guess, is there any kind of additional harm caused by watching on a phone? Does it make any difference?
I don't think there's any evidence. The longer report that was for the screen use guidance specifically said there is no evidence around the harms around blue light, that sort of thing. There isn't enough to show that's damaging. So I'd say I don't know. I think the only thing though that I think Rhiannon alluded to is that how isolating it can sometimes be if you're on a really small screen, and it's just not a sort of communal experience. And I think that's what's quite important. But having said that, there's also two little kids together having fun with an interactive game. There's value in that as well. So I don't think, I mean, I don't know if there have been studies of the types of different screen, but I suspect it doesn't really matter what it's on. It's more what the content is, who you're doing it with, and how you're interacting that's important.
Thank you. Joss, there's a question come in about different ages of children. It sounds like you've had situations of different ages that you're working with. How do you deal with that kind of sibling issue where a little one ends up watching something that is maybe appropriate for an older audience? How do you sort of find that middle ground? Is there content that you think is suitable for everybody, or do they take it in turns? How do you manage that?
It's tricky, and sometimes it's a strong no that we can't watch that with little sisters about, because trying to manage little sister not watching something that older brother's watching becomes impossible. And it's more important for our younger child to not be exposed to what they're watching to an extent, rather than manage the emotions that come with it. And then it's also, sometimes you also become confident in telling children no as well, because sometimes the kids just have to be told no, and this is why it's a no, and we've got to lean into the no, and kind of that's it, and explain to them why, and kind of not stand our ground like it's a battle, but yeah, that kind of, it's a hard one, but I have to put my foot down with my kids sometimes and be like, guys, that can't happen right now. She's awake. Maybe you can go to bed a bit later and you can watch it, but I'll give you 10 minutes for bedtime and you can watch it. And we give them a little bit of grace and try to not feel too bad about it. But there's sometimes you have to kind of be a little bit stern and say, no, it can't happen right now, but we can do it then. And then that way everybody hopefully wins.
Yeah. Thanks, Joss. Yeah, there's a question about so Joss has been saying already that, you know, it's good to talk about sort of healthy habits, but also kind of what's safe and what's appropriate. Maybe this is a question though for Olivia and Jane around actually if there's anything out there in the sort of foundation around like media literacy. You know, how do you educate children around sort of navigating this, maybe to sort of children and parents? Any potential existing examples that the panel are aware of? of kind of how you look into those digital platforms, how you get that guidance, both in terms of supporting children's digital literacy and parents too.
So do you mean in terms of how children can understand what's appropriate for them, or do you mean parental
Yeah, I think
controls,
so.
or?
Yeah, so I think my understanding of the question is that it's about so I'll read it out just in case I've got this wrong, but we've been considering the opportunities for modelling and scaffolding habits of inquiry around digital platforms, devices and content as a foundation for media literacy. I'd be interested in any potential existing examples of this that the panel are aware of, and thoughts on how this may or may not align with the guidance. So my understanding of that was it was about sort of, how you kind of support children to get that sort of, I guess, sort of healthy inquiry about what's safe. But I may have misinterpreted that question.
No, and I think you're right. I think it comes back to media literacy, and I'm sure Joss will have something to say on this, in that often media literacy ends up being taught a bit late in school. So it is one of those things that definitely could be done in early years, or through house visitors or nannies and childminders, maybe just around thinking about what makes you feel good. Because the other thing I was thinking about that we haven't touched on that much is, parents will know, oh, that show actually makes them go off a bit doolally and we need to calm them down, and that one doesn't, or when they play that after they've played that game, oh god. So I think it's also having that sort of awareness of thinking, how can you reflect on how something makes you feel? The parents being able to talk about that with their child is important. I noticed in the chat a few people have put up other links to parental control specifically, and I think those are useful, and I think some of those organisations that are trying to give guidance will also have stuff around like Internet Matters, and then a parent zone. I think what they're trying to say is, we are here to help you, but then it comes back to the concern we've got around platforms not being as helpful as they could be. So I think, Jane, have you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard, and what we've been talking about today is basically kind of like the advice you would give. It really comes down to personal, your children best, or the children that you're taking care of best, and in a way it's kind of subjective. So you're the expert on those children, and a lot of it is really instinctive. Is their favorite program one that seems beneficial, that doesn't get them in a high emotional state? There is, the guidance that we've got from the government is really helpful, but really breaking it down and coming up with specific examples hasn't been done.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Just quickly, a couple more. One is about advice for nurseries. There's a question asking, what is the recommendation for nurseries? I often observe children in nurseries and they use screens. Some parents might think their children are not using much screen time, but if you add nursery time in as well. And I don't know whether there's been guidance issued on that, or whether anyone has any knowledge of sort of how nurseries are navigating what they should and shouldn't be putting on screen. Joss, maybe you can tell us from a practitioner point of view, because obviously you're looking at it. I know you're nannying at home quite a lot, but what do you think is appropriate?
I've worked in nurseries for a few years, and a lot of it is educational stuff nurseries tend to show, but they do struggle with what to show, especially when you've got so much children in the space that aren't exposed to screen time at all. And some children are exposed to screen time, so finding that balance is quite hard. But as for nurseries, it's doing the research on what is the best shows children should be watching, and having that across board over nurseries, so all your staff members and teams and families know. And you might even, actually a great idea is maybe sending out emails or messages saying, hi guys, we found this new show, the children love it, we've realized we're giving them 15 minutes of it a week is a great introduction to it. We tried 20 minutes, it didn't go well. 15 minutes is the bracket, but this is the episode that you like. You should give it a try. And this is the time guidance that we're supporting you parents and giving it. So parents are, because sometimes we need our hands held, and parents are now being given the program and the capacity of how they should watch it. And it's also mirrored by the nursery as well. So we all kind of feel like we're working together, because I know nurseries and families sometimes can be quite tricky being on the same page. And that's a great way to get them on the same page, because you're kind of telling them what to do, holding their hand and giving them a little bit of guidance with it as well. As a nursery, that's probably the best way to go about it. When I manage nurseries, we sometimes had to kind of give parents the ingredients on how to make the mixture, and then come back with their own mixture and then say, yeah, that was amazing. I'm going to try that one over here as well.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. It's 10:59, so I'm going to wrap us up so that we can all go off and do whatever we need to do from 11. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been great to have such attendance today. We have got lots of other questions, and we will endeavour to come back to you individually and follow up on those questions if we can. There will be a recording available on our website soon. So if you want to rewatch it or share it, if you know of colleagues who weren't able to attend today, it will be available to them. And we'll write up a short note as well of everything that we've talked about. So you've got plenty of ways to access the information. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to our panelists. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.